Let's talk about breakfast at Tiffany's. You know the image. Audrey Hepburn, little black dress, pearl rope, cigarette holder roughly the length of a javelin, a pastry and a coffee cup hovering in front of the most famous jewelry store on Fifth Avenue, while she gazes in the window like she just invented the concept of longing. It is, without question, one of the most iconic opening shots in cinema history. It is also, dear viewers, an opening shot that almost didn't exist. Because shooting breakfast at Tiffany's, that breezy, sun-dappled, apparently effortless romantic comedy about a charming Manhattan socialite and her complicated feelings about love, was, behind the camera, an unmitigated Category 5, what are we even doing here disaster. And I am delighted to tell you everything about it. Let's begin at the beginning, which is usually a good place to start, even if Truman Capote would disagree. Capote's novella, published in 1958, was not exactly a conventional, romantic comedy. Holly Golightly, his creation, his baby, his semi-autobiographical fever dream, was not the sweet, lovably scattered kook that Audrey Hepburn would later make immortal. Capote's Holly was sharper, wilder, and frankly a lot more interesting. She was a kept woman, an escort, a girl who had clawed her way out of rural Texas poverty and reinvented herself as a glamorous creature of Manhattan nightlife with the survival instincts of a very well-dressed alley cat. Paramount Pictures took one look at all of that and said, "Adorable, we'll take it. Now please remove approximately 40% of the personality." Capote, for his part, had very specific ideas about who should play Holly. He wanted Marilyn Monroe. He pushed hard for Marilyn Monroe. He wrote letters, made phone calls, and apparently told anyone who would listen that Audrey Hepburn was all wrong for the part. His exact quote, delivered with the particular venom of a Southern writer who felt betrayed by Hollywood, was that casting Audrey was the most miscast role in the history of cinema. Audrey Hepburn won a BAFTA for that role, and the film made $14 million on a $2.5 million budget. Truman Capote was incorrect, but the casting drama was just the opening act. Blake Edwards, the man tasked with directing this film, was talented, stylish, and absolutely impossible to work with under pressure. His relationship with Audrey Hepburn on set was, let's call it, professionally tense. Audrey, famously, was a perfectionist who needed warmth and encouragement to do her best work. Edwards was more of a chaos artist. The production was running over schedule, the budget was creaking, and Edwards, channeling the spirit of every director who has ever made a classic film by being mildly unhinged, kept pushing. The famous opening scene, Audrey stepping out of a cab at 5 a.m. to have breakfast on the sidewalk outside Tiffany's, had to be filmed at actual 5 a.m. on an actual New York City street, with actual New Yorkers wandering through the frame, with absolutely no regard for cinematic history whatsoever. Crowd control on Manhattan streets in 1960 was essentially just a suggestion. The production team had to shoot the scene early enough that the city hadn't fully woken up, which meant dragging Audrey Hepburn in full costume and hair and makeup out to Fifth Avenue before the sun had properly committed to rising. Audrey, who was also, at the time, going through a deeply painful miscarriage during production, a fact largely kept private and only discussed years later, showed up. She did the scene. She ate the pastry and drank the coffee and gazed at the jewelry store like she was communing with God, and she was magnificent. The professional standard of that woman under those circumstances is not discussed enough. Here is a piece of information that will rearrange your understanding of Hollywood decision-making. The studio wanted to cut Moon River. Henry Mancini wrote Moon River specifically for Audrey Hepburn's voice, her limited but extraordinarily expressive range, the particular quality of vulnerability she brought to simple melodies. The scene in which she sings it, sitting on a fire escape with a guitar, hair loose, looking more unguarded than at any other point in the film, is considered one of the great movie moments of the 20th century. An executive at Paramount, and I want you to sit with this information, reportedly wanted the song removed from the film entirely, said it was slowing things down, said audiences wouldn't respond to it. Audrey Hepburn, who was not typically known for confrontational behavior, allegedly stood up in the screening room where this suggestion was made and said, with great precision, "Over my dead body." The song stayed. Moon River won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. It won the Grammy. It became one of the most recognizable pieces of music of the entire decade. Mancini later said it was the song he was most proud of in his career. That executive, presumably, has spent the subsequent 60 years not mentioning this story at parties. The unnamed orange tabby cat who features in the film, Holly's cat, famously called Cat because Holly refuses to give him a proper name, as a whole metaphor about commitment and belonging, was, according to virtually everyone involved in the production, a complete nightmare. The cat's name was Orangey. Orangey had appeared in several films before Breakfast at Tiffany's and had won the Patsy Award, essentially the animal equivalent of an Oscar, twice, which tells you everything you need to know about Hollywood's relationship with talent and temperament. Orangey was extraordinarily photogenic. Orangey was also, by all accounts, a deeply unpleasant animal to work with, prone to scratching, biting, escaping, and refusing to perform on cue in ways that made the human actors look cooperative by comparison. The scene, where Audrey runs through the rain calling for Cat, required multiple takes. Not because of Audrey, not because of the rain machine, because Orangey kept leaving. There is a metaphor in there somewhere about the film's themes of independence and the impossibility of owning something wild. The cat was, in this sense, giving a thematically resonant performance. He was also just a difficult cat. While we're cataloguing production nightmares, let's take a moment to appreciate the behind-the-scenes saga of the most famous little black dress in history, because even that nearly didn't happen the way we remember it. Hubert de Givenchy designed the gown, and there is a version of this story that gets told as a fairy tale. Audrey called Hubert, Hubert obliged, beauty was achieved. What that version leaves out is that Paramount's costume department initially pushed back against hiring an outside couturier at all. Studios had their own wardrobe departments, they had their own designers. Bringing in Givenchy, a Parisian couture house, for a film set in New York was considered an extravagance. Audrey, who had been working with Givenchy since Sabrina in 1954, and credited him with understanding her body and her spirit in ways that changed her confidence entirely, was immovable on this point. Givenchy came, the dress was made. Here is the other thing nobody mentions. The original dress, the actual gown worn in the opening sequence, was later sold at auction in 2006 for $807,000. It is now the most expensive dress from a film ever auctioned. The studio that didn't want to spend money on a couturier made nearly $1 million off the results. There is a lesson in there about trusting the woman who knows what she's doing, but Hollywood has historically been slow to learn it. There was also the matter of the accessories. The cigarette holder that Holly carries, absurdly, magnificently long, a full 19 inches, which is longer than most people's, forearms, was a prop decision that several people on set reportedly thought was too much, too theatrical, too over the top. The cigarette holder became an icon of mid-century style. It is the cigarette holder. It was absolutely, definitively the right call. The production also had to negotiate with Tiffany & Company directly for permission to film outside and inside the store. a negotiation that required convincing one of the world's most prestigious jewelry houses that having a slightly chaotic film crew camped outside their Fifth Avenue location in the pre-dawn hours was good for the brand. Tiffany's agreed. The jewelry store became as famous as the film. It did not hurt them. What's remarkable, looking back at the costume and production design of Breakfast at Tiffany's, is how much of what feels effortless and inevitable was actually the result of someone fighting for it. The dress, the accessories, the Givenchy, the location. Each of these required someone to push back against the cheaper, easier, safer option. Each time, the person who pushed back was right. This is the hidden story of most classic films. Not the glamour, but the arguments that produce the glamour. And now we arrive at the part of this essay where I must address the significant elephant, or rather the significant caricature, in the room, Mr. Yunioshi, played by Mickey Rooney, in yellow face, with a prosthetic to alter his eye shape, speaking in an exaggerated mock Japanese accent. It is the most embarrassing thing in the film. It was embarrassing in 1961, when the film was released. It was embarrassing in the preceding decades as the film became a classic. It is embarrassing now. Multiple people involved in the production, in later years, expressed regret about it. Blake Edwards himself eventually said it was the thing in his career he was most ashamed of. The character, a fumbling, shrieking Japanese neighbor used entirely as comic relief, was not only deeply racist but also, on a basic craft level, not funny. It is a sequence that stops the film dead every time it appears, and not in a good way. What makes this particularly notable, from a production standpoint, is that Mickey Rooney was not the only option. Asian American actors existed in Hollywood in 1961. They were rarely hired for significant roles, which was itself a system of racist exclusion. But for a supporting comedic part, the decision to cast a white actor in yellowface was not a necessity. It was a choice, a bad one, made by people who knew better and chose the easier, lazier, more harmful path. This is the part of Breakfast at Tiffany's history that the iconic image on the poster doesn't show you. The cigarette holder and the pearls and the gorgeous melancholy are real. So is this. Here is the thing about Breakfast at Tiffany's that keeps people coming back despite all of it. Despite the casting battles and the on-set chaos and orangey and the catastrophic racial politics of Mr. Yunioshi and the studio trying to cut the best song in the movie. Audrey Hepburn was doing something genuinely extraordinary. She took a character that the source material and the screenplay had in some ways domesticated and softened, and she found the real grief inside her. Holly Golightly, in Hepburn's hands, is not just charming and whimsical. She is running. She is terrified. She is a woman who has constructed an elaborate performance of lightness to avoid facing the things that hurt her. And Audrey, who knew something about maintaining grace under unbearable pressure, having survived the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands as a child, understood that bone deep. The scene at the end of the film, in the rain, with Orangey, who, again, did not cooperate, when Holly finally stops running and reaches for something real, Hepburn makes you believe every second of it. Not because the script is flawless, not because the production was smooth, but because she was, when the camera rolled, incandescent. Great films are usually not made under good conditions. They are made under terrible conditions by people who showed up anyway. Breakfast at Tiffany's is a testament to that, a movie assembled out of compromise and difficulty and creative conflict, and one very unpleasant cat, which somehow, inexplicably, became the image of an entire era. And here is the final, quietly staggering thing. Most of the people who made the right calls on this film were told they were wrong first. Audrey was the wrong Holly. Givenchy was the wrong designer. Moon River was the wrong song to keep. The cigarette holder was too much. The opening scene was too impractical. The budget was too tight. The schedule too fraught. The material too literary for a mainstream audience. Every single one of those objections was overruled by someone with better taste and more conviction. And every single one of those someones was vindicated completely. That is the actual story of breakfast at Tiffany's. Not the pearls and the pastry, not the cigarette holder and the Givenchy, not even the extraordinary, luminous, quietly devastating performance at the center of it all. Though that is certainly worth discussing at length, and I intend to. The story is that genius is almost always inconvenient, that the best version of anything is usually the version someone had to fight for, that Orangey was a menace and Moon River is perfect, and Truman Capote, bless his difficult heart, was still wrong. He was, to be perfectly clear, still wrong. And Holly Golightly, wild, untamable, refusing to be owned by anyone or anything, named or unnamed, would have understood that completely. Thank you for watching History on High Heels, because the past is always better in good shoes.